Well, welcome, Evan. Thank you for joining us this evening. I appreciate you being here.
Certainly. Thanks for having me.
I think you've gone a little above and beyond any other guests that we've had on the show with helping us get everything situated and all of our cameras set up. So we appreciate that.
It's all in a day's work.
Right? It's
Yes.
something a little extra to do during these times, right?
Exactly. But, we all have the gift of time right now. Anyone who's in live events, we have a little bit more time. So
Absolutely.
happy to put it to use for a good cause.
Yeah, well, we appreciate that. And, just to give a little intro, we have Evan here, who is not only a multi-book writer, but has a production event company and also a public speaker. Is that correct?
That is correct.
All right. Well, so you have 3 books. Is that correct?
I have 3 books. The first is a kind of strange book. It's about what happens to your digital life when you pass away. Kind of a topic I stumbled into early in my career. And the other 2 are about customer experience. And really what I do is I help companies create experiences, whether they're for their customers or event attendees. But it's important to know that in public speaking and in events, I like to tell people that I make half of my revenue from meetings and events and the other half of my revenue from meetings and events. So
Right.
you can imagine right now things are a little dicey, but that's okay.
Absolutely. Actually, the Digital Afterlife is a startup that I actually know of that's getting into that space. That's something we'll definitely have to go down that rabbit hole a little bit, because I don't think enough people really think about that. And it's something that we don't consider until it's too late. So I'd love to know your thoughts on that. I think it's a really interesting topic that can get a little morbid, so people probably try to avoid it more often than not.
You're exactly right. It's not the kind of thing you bring up at a cocktail party.
Right.
I've tried, I know.
Yeah, people are like, what's your book on? And then you start talking about death and they're like, ooh.
Slowly back away.
Yeah, exactly. Gotcha. Well, again, thank you for being here. We'd love to just learn a little bit more about, I know you focus mostly on corporate events. So, a lot of our viewers are either wedding vendors or brides and grooms planning a big event. So to get your perspective on what you're seeing in the industry would be great.
Sure. Well, let me first say that I have a ton of respect for people who work in the wedding industry, because I don't have the stomach for it. And so allow me to salute you and say, thank you. Thank you for everything you do. It's wonderful. I'm glad I don't have to do it.
Yes, it I think it can be a challenging job, to say the least. There's a lot of emotions and a lot of unexpected things that come into play that people don't consider. So the corporate world is a little bit more straightforward and direct than planning a wedding.
Well, and if I may, I think the challenge is you have an individual who is spending their own personal money, sometimes their life savings, on this one event. It's the only time that they will do something. Well, hopefully the only time.
Right.
They'll do something at this scale, versus dealing with a corporate event planner. They're going to be doing this multiple times. They can get better next time. They know that they can adjust the level of production for their event based upon the budget, and the perspective is different. And so it's really challenging, and that's why I salute wedding vendors, because it's really challenging to work with someone who is trying to make their dollars go absolutely as far as they can, and the vision oftentimes outweighs the budget.
Absolutely. And I always like to say it's a B2B, business to business transaction, but you're dealing with a consumer. And the consumer, to your point, hopefully has not put on an event like this before. So if this is their first wedding, they've never spent, tens of thousands of dollars on a one-time thing. So it's such an experience in that itself, just losing that much money on just an event. So then not knowing what you're getting into can definitely add to that stress, for sure.
And I think it's important to realize, and you use the phrase losing the money on this event.
Right.
You're truly spending it. You're deciding we're going to have this experience and we're going to spend this money on that experience. And oftentimes for a corporate event, it's not a spend, it's an investment. We know we're going to get customers, we know we're going to engage our employees, and this is going to pay off for us in the future. And so it's a very different equation, it's a business equation as opposed to your point, kind of an emotional equation.
Yeah, that's interesting because you are getting some type of ROI on a corporate event, whether it's, even if it's just, when I was in the corporate world, I always loved sales kickoff, right? There'd always these huge events out in Vegas or San Diego. And even though there's not, well, we'd have customers come to that and it's employee satisfaction, but with a wedding, the ROI is just the experience and the memories. So that's, especially when you're on a budget and it's a huge expense, that's a little harder to justify than a multi-billion-dollar corporation's budget. So it's a really interesting perspective.
But I like that point. The return is the memories.
Exactly.
It's having the experience and looking back on it fondly. And so I think the key is to invest your dollars wisely, but also make sure that you're going to enjoy yourself and you're going to remember it fondly, as opposed to it being, a bit of a disaster, which I'm sure they can be from time to time.
Absolutely. And I think that that's a huge piece, right? Is that, and I think wedding planners are not appreciated enough in our space. A lot of brides take on too much themselves, and then they can't actually enjoy this event that is supposed to be celebrating the love of them and their significant other. They take on so much, and all the do-it-yourself projects and things, and then they get so wrapped up in that.
And the intent is good. And so
Absolutely.
You're an entrepreneur. I'm an entrepreneur. I'm feeling more like one lately because I felt like I was running a small business, and now it's largely just back to me because of coronavirus and all the fun things going on. But you have to ask the question, is it worth my time to do this? And so in a startup early on, well, you kind of do everything because who else is going to do it, right? And you're experiencing that right now. But the further you get into business, you realize that if you want to go farther, you need to go together. You need to have more people supporting you. People were doing the things that they're really good at. And so the message I would give to a bride is there are people who are really good at this. And actually, I'll tell you a story, a relevant story. Last week, I decided to buy a grill. Okay?
Yes.
And we talked about this some beforehand. And I called the store in advance. The guy told me, he's like, I've got one sitting here on the floor assembled with your name on it. So, I'm over there. I'm going to buy a grill. And I'm going to be cooking in like 3 hours. This will be fantastic. I got there. And, well, there was an assembly charge. Since it was already assembled, it was going to cost a little more than I was told on the phone. And so at this point, I have the gentleman telling me, oh, well, the assembly is totally worth it. If you've never done something like this before, which I kind of have, but it's going to take a little while. It takes one of my guys about an hour and a half. It'll probably take you more like 3 hours. And I said, I was feeling a little duped. Not gonna lie. So I decided to assemble it myself. And I spent 4 hours putting this thing together.
Yep.
And then, cook this tiny little steak at the end of the night. And I'm like, well, there we go. I guess that was worth it. But upon reflection, I said, you know what? That $70 assembly charge was probably worth it.
Right.
Not
worth the headache.
It's a hard thing to admit, right? And so the thing that, much like the digital afterlife that you mentioned, you only get one chance at it. And, assuming that you don't intend upon having multiple marriages, which no one goes into one thinking that, right? You only get to do this once. So do it right. Let someone help you and let you enjoy the experience. Because that's what I tell my corporate clients all the time. As event planners and producers, we are here so that you can engage in your event and enjoy your event, not spend all your time worrying and trying to coordinate. So that would be my number one piece of advice for a bride is let people help you. They are absolutely worth it.
Absolutely. What do you think about the mindset of the bride? I mean, when they're going into this event planning experience, right? This is something they've never put on before. They're super excited. They just got proposed to. How should they be thinking about planning this event?
Well, having not been one before.
Fair. Me neither. So that's why, this is a great question.
Well, let's hope you get the opportunity.
Thank you.
if I'm ever a bride, we've got, other concerns.
Okay. Fair. Well, even as a groom, though, I mean.
You're right. You're
grooms
totally
can
right.
be just as excited as brides.
And who knows? Maybe one day I'll be a bride. You never know.
I love to say that the bride is the spirit of who's planning the event, not necessarily the female in the situation.
Ooh, I like that.
Yes.
I like that. And so, in fact, me and my girlfriend have already had the conversation that should that happen, should we get to that point, that my number 2 at attended events is going to be in charge. Like, period, full stop. Everything goes through her. And that's just the way it is, because we understand that to enjoy the event, we can't also run the event. And so you're starting with, as someone newly proposed to, freshly engaged, the visions of what your perfect day start to become real. Because who knows, you might have been doodling in a notebook for the last 20 years or 30 years of your life saying, oh, I want this and I want that. And maybe I want it to be in a barn, or maybe I want it to be in a church, or maybe a barn in a church. And it just all starts to flow. Right. And it's important to get your vision right, but realize that you come to a point where you start to figure out, how can I make my vision fit my budget? Because my budget is this. Or you have the hard realization of, I can have a wedding or I can have a honeymoon. I can't have both. Those are hard decisions to make. But when you make it to that point, realize that you should focus mostly on your enjoyment of the day. And that means fewer things that you have to do. And I would also submit fewer things that your family members or friends have to do, because you want them to enjoy the event as well. And I know it's so tempting to say, what can I do to stretch my budget? Well, maybe so-and-so can do this and maybe so-and-so can do that. And it may very well be that it works out perfectly. But what happens when you have your friend, let's say a friend or a family member, let's say you have them cater the wedding for you. What happens when things don't go as planned? I just have this vision of you in your white dress, in a catering kitchen, yelling at one of your dearly beloved friends or family members.
Right.
Like, you don't want that stress.
Right.
First of all, you want someone to take care of that for you. That's a wonderful planner and a coordinator. And then you want to let the professionals handle it, because even though you're doing this for the first time, they've done it hundreds of times.
Absolutely. And then for that person not being able to be at the event, like if we're going to have grandma cater the wedding, well, now she's stuck in the kitchen trying to make sure everything goes as planned instead of actually being present. So I think that I never think there's bad intentions, but I think, everybody tries to think, oh, I love her cooking. I'd love for it to be a part of this. And they just need to, think more about how do I make it enjoyable for the guests and for myself, rather than, I think everybody just gets so excited when they go on Pinterest and see these cool do-it-yourself things, and they're like, oh, this is so cute, I can do this. And they don't think about what that actually entails for either themselves or their friend or family member who has to then sit there and make all of these things and so on and so forth.
I'll say this, Pinterest, YouTube, all of those wonderful sites that give you all these great DIY ideas, they're all liars.
Yep.
Right? Oh,
I
it's
have fallen
3
victim.
easy steps.
Yep.
No, it's not 3 easy steps. It's 3 easy shots on a video and, 8 hours of really hard work and mistakes and redoing. And sometimes those things can be fun. But I would suggest to a couple, as they were making decisions about their wedding, you may be thinking, gosh, we only have this much money right now. I would submit to you that often you can go get more money. You can make more money in your life. There's so many things you can do to generate more resources. The one thing you can't get back is that time. And do you want to spend the week of your wedding being frustrated about it? Or do you want to spend the week of your wedding enjoying yourself and then it culminating in this wonderful experience? And so I would say value your time and thereby your sanity above all else.
Absolutely. I think that's a really great point. And, I think the whole experience, and we talked a little bit about this before, of a wedding, and having everybody present is a huge topic of concern with today's climate, right? With everything going on, I hear so many business ideas about how to implement a virtual wedding. And I know we talked about it a little bit about just exactly what that entails if you're going to broadcast and live stream a wedding. But I don't think a lot of people, because I personally did not. I didn't realize how much work actually goes into a true live production and what that means from not only a cost perspective, but just a realistic expectations perspective. So I'd love for you to talk a little bit more about that and just tell people, hey, this is what we're talking about when we're saying a live stream, live production for your wedding.
Sure. So we have this phrase in events. We call it level of production or quality of production, or, production quality for short. And when we say that, those phrases, what we really mean is, how good do we want it to be? And you can't ask someone, well, how good does it need to be? And they're going to say, well, it needs to be fantastic. It needs to be perfect, because that's not a good question to ask. And I'm sure if you ask a bride, hey, how good do I need to do my job? Their response is going to be, oh, you need to do your job perfectly.
Yeah.
But we have to have a language for talking about these things. So let's pretend that we are going to live stream a wedding. Let's say we've got 50 people who can come in person. Maybe that's going to be one of those numbers that we have to play with as we're in this phased reopening that we may be in this summer. And we have another 50 people that maybe need to see it. Or maybe we have members of our family who can't travel because they're in a vulnerable population. And so we want them to be able to experience the wedding. Okay, just talking about the ceremony, there are a few key moments of the ceremony, both of which require multiple cameras to capture effectively. And so if you talk to any wedding videographer, they have at least 2 cameras. And sometimes they're moving with one, and they have one that's kind of stationary as kind of a backup, because you need to be able to capture the shot of the couple at the altar, wherever that may be, with the officiant. That's your sort of standard shot. But you really want to see the face of the bride as they walk in. So now you need a reverse shot. And now you obviously don't want a camera like right up there in
right.
in front of you. So you have to then, okay, how can we figure out how to conceal that? Does that become a stationary camera that's set in advance? Is it a robotic camera that you're able to operate? And so let's say we want to be able to show our wedding guests different angles and switch between them. So now we've made it to, we have 2, maybe 3 cameras. One of them probably has an operator, and we have a switcher that switches between those cameras. And that's going to have an operator too. Now let's talk about audio. And of course, here on a podcast, audio has to be pristine. It has to be perfect. Well, that's the expectation that a lot of people have. Well, imagine what would happen if a video guy came up to the bride and said, I need you to wear this microphone. Not so much.
Not going to happen.
Right?
Yeah.
And so now we have to figure out, how do we get the right audio? So is that a microphone that the officiant wears? Is the groom wearing a microphone? Are we hiding a microphone? I've seen a microphone hidden coming out of the top of the Bible that the officiant is holding. I've seen lots of tricks.
No way.
Yeah. And so, but now you need a person's, if you were recording video for post-production, you'd record it all and then you'd figure it all out later. If you're doing it live, you have to have someone who is there listening and deciding what actually goes live. And so now we've got 3 people, equipment that costs thousands of dollars, all coming in to just accomplish putting your ceremony on something like Zoom in a really high quality. And so you're talking thousands of dollars at that point. Now, you could totally have your cousin Joe in the front row with an iPad on a tripod or even in his hand, and that's totally fine. But you have to decide going into it, which one do you want, and what level of quality do you expect from that?
Absolutely. Yeah, and I think that's something that people need to consider too is what is the expectation, right? And there's always going to be a trade-off, right? Some people care more about the photos, some people will care more about their dress, some people will care more about the flowers. It all depends on the particular couple that we're talking about. I always find it interesting, especially just being in the position that I'm in, where we're matching these couples to vendors, seeing how they're describing their services and seeing how what is important to different couples, and I know that you had mentioned that the vendors, some advice that you might give them would be how are you describing your service? What is that expectation? Because I think there is a disconnect in, you know, they're trying to win the quote for the couple over, and they want to just, you know, say yes to everything, but then it's not a realistic expectation.
Right, and the question starts to become, well, what does it cost for you to come photograph my wedding? Well, how common metrics are, well, how long do I need to be there? How many people do I have shooting? But there's also levels of, well, how many shots do you want of family? How many shots do you want during the ceremony? How many shots of the details do you want? Because there are so many different things that can be captured. And so let's just use photography as an example. When I'm producing a corporate event and I'm hiring a photographer, I'm handing them a shot list. And that shot list says, these are the things that are important to me. I want you to make sure these get captured. And then I let them do their job, right? And so it's important as a couple to be able to say, here's the shot list I want for my wedding. Here's how long I think the photographer needs to be there, and come to them with that information.
Absolutely.
As opposed to coming in the door and, you know, signing up for something you may not know what you're signing up for. And it's incumbent upon the vendor, to your point, to be able to ask those questions. Well, what shots are important to you? What shots are not important to you? What shots are going to be important to your family that may not be important to you?
Absolutely. I think that's a great piece of advice, is the shot list, because it's not something that the normal person thinks about, right? It's easy for, if you have these corporate events and you say, hey, this is what I need out of this. If I have a speaker, I need these angles, or whatever the shot list may be. But I think that couples need to, especially with how much essentially information is available on social media, right? You should be able to look through different profiles and see, okay, these are the shots I like. This is what I would like in my wedding album, and kind of compiling that to show your photographer of, hey, this is kind of what I'm envisioning. I think that would be really a great piece of advice.
And back to the point about your sanity. If you do that in advance, right? And you've informed your photographer, it's done. It's taken care of. You don't have to worry about it. And that's one less thing you have to worry about during the event itself.
Absolutely. So what do you think the biggest difference then is? I mean, aside from the obvious that this is emotional and this is a couple and not a business, I mean, what is the biggest difference that you're seeing in at least behavior, or just in general, from corporate versus weddings? Because I know that my company has talked about eventually pivoting to create a platform for corporate events. So I'd love to know just what you're seeing in the difference between those two mindsets and vendors.
Sure. So I think the budget is certainly different. Corporate will spend more, and I think there are more the expectations are higher in corporate events. Not to say that the expectations in weddings are not higher. The difference is that you're almost always working with an experienced planner in corporate events who sets their expectations very clearly. And so, because they know how to articulate those. And I'd say the pressure is probably about the same, because corporation is spending thousands, if not millions of dollars, and you're spending thousands of dollars, but $1,000 to you and $1,000 to a corporation is two very different things.
Absolutely.
And in the type of work we do, and I think Scott has some photos of the type of work that we do. You know, we've got massive halls with, you know, thousands of people sitting in them, and that is there's a certain pressure to getting that right. But if we mess something up here, now to be clear, we've rehearsed many times, but if something gets messed up, there's another chance. There's another event to do for that company. There's as a vendor, me offering a discount after the fact warms the heart of corporate America.
Absolutely.
If a vendor messes up a wedding, there is no amount of money that can fix it. And that's a challenge. And so I think that's one of the big differences is in corporate it's dollars focused and ROI focused, and there's so much emotion that's involved in a wedding, and rightfully so. There should be a lot of emotion involved. But all of the differences really hinge on that one fundamental difference.
Right. So what's your favorite type of corporate event to shoot? I know that we had some fun pictures to show before. Is there any particular, like, I know you've done massive public speaking types events. Are there any other ones that you particularly are fond of?
I am particularly...
Like the pink dinosaur one?
Oh, this one. Oh, this is interesting.
This is my favorite one, I think.
This is one of our very favorite clients. And of course, no matter which client showed up on the screen, I would say they're one of our very favorite clients.
Pendo's a big one, though, in this area.
They really are. What we love is we love an event that is of high production value, like Pandemonium here was, but also an event that is that you're allowed to have fun. Absolutely. And obviously we've got dinosaurs, inflatable dinosaurs. By the way, inflatable dinosaurs do not protect you from coronavirus.
Oh, they're not.
There's an article online, just to be clear. However, you get to have fun. This was before a happy hour, right?
Nice.
Now,
yeah.
I would love to go to a wedding where we had inflatable dinosaurs at the happy hour. I think that would be amazing, right? Difference is, I don't know who we would pay to be said dinosaurs, because I don't want my friends to have to do it, although I'm sure some of them would readily volunteer. Probably the closest that we come to weddings are galas, because
interesting, yeah,
they have a lot of the centerpieces and flowers and entertainment that weddings do, but they still have the corporate production budget. So, for instance, here's a gala that we worked on a couple years ago, and one of the things you'll notice is really impressive centerpieces.
Yeah, they're beautiful.
For this gala, we spent over $3,000 on centerpieces alone, and because we have to rent all the glassware you see here, buy the flowers, someone has to come and set all of those up. There's transportation, there's return, there's cleaning. All of these steps go into it. And so that's one point I wanted to make to your audience, is that it's not just what you see, it's everything that goes into that. Whether it's transportation, preparation, acquisition, as well as, tearing things down, getting it ready for the next person. All of those costs go into it. Same is true with things like linen rentals. You're paying actually very little for the rental of the linen. What you're really paying for is the cleaning of the linen to be ready for the next person.
Absolutely. And no bride thinks of that, and nor would they have a reason to. I mean, I was on a call yesterday with a wedding planner, and we were just talking through the questions that they need to quote appropriately, right? And they need to know a lot of specifics about the venue. I mean, one thing they said is, hey, am I taking the trash out, or do they have a dumpster? And that's something that no bride would normally think about, like asking, because they don't think about who's throwing out the trash.
It's the planner's job to ask that question.
Absolutely.
In corporate, it's almost always the caterer's job to deal with the trash.
Interesting.
Yeah, so that's important to know. I don't do trash.
I wouldn't want to either.
although lately I might have to do more of that. Another point I want to make is I'm talking about lighting, because a good photographer will bring their flashes to create great lighting, but I think it's important to think about the quality of experience your guests have and ask the question, how well lit are things going to be? Because we've got a great shot of a band here, and there's some moving lights, there's some uplighting and texture that goes with the drape there, but we've got some decent lighting on the band itself. And so you want to think about where are the focal points in your event, and make sure you plan to light them really well. Just assuming that, hey, whatever's in the room will do, doesn't always work out really well. For instance, for this particular gala that we have some photos of, and I don't have this photo with me, we had a cake made for it. It's the only time in my events career that I've had a multi-layer cake made, because cool. We don't typically do that. But one of the things that we did is we specifically put spotlights on the cake, so that it became a focal point in the room.
Absolutely.
Where, so I've seen some weddings where the cake was kind of over in the corner, and the cake's a big deal.
Yeah, it's like a beautiful cake, and,
And you can't see it.
Yeah, and, I think that goes back to having a planner, right? Is that if you have somebody to think, because to your point, there are multiple people who can be in charge of the lighting. It can be the DJ, it can be the photographer. So how, as a couple, do you know that's being taken care of, and who do you put in charge of that? Do I assume the DJ is going to bring the up lights, or do I assume the photographer will? I mean,
you actually don't know,
right?
You have to have those conversations. And I think the biggest challenge for a bride, no matter if you've never worked in events, no matter how many books you get, no matter how many shows you go to, you don't always know what questions to ask. And an experienced planner will know the questions to ask. They'll know the questions to ask you. And then in turn, once they know what your vision is, they'll know the questions to ask the vendors.
Right. Absolutely. And I think that gets lost in translation often, is just, how do you put together what your vision is with your budget and what's a reasonable expectation. I think that's a huge piece, because I know we keep talking about budget and cost, but it really does.
It's the limiter of all fun,
right?
Including in corporate events. We can, I've thrown parties that were $1,000. I've thrown parties that were $100,000. And
dang, I want to come to those parties.
Those are pretty good parties. And Scott may have some photos of those parties. I don't know if he has them right now, but I think they might make their way into the final.
Okay.
I heard a little something before the show. And it's not a matter of how much fun do we have at those parties. It's a matter of what's the level of production, and what are we putting into them, and what's the point of being here? What kind of effect are we trying to create? And so an experienced planner will look at your budget and say, this is a reasonable expectation for the budget you have, and can have that conversation with you very early about budget versus expectations, as opposed to having it at the wrong time. The wrong time is when you've spent what you feel is a large amount of money, and it's after the fact and you're disappointed. It's the worst time to have the expectations conversation.
Absolutely. And I think that's probably, I think that just from the brides that I've talked to, when they start to realize that they're either overwhelmed or they don't know what, to your point, what questions they should be asking, and they've already booked a few of their vendors and they're realizing, okay, this is not what I anticipated at all. And then they start thinking about a planner. It's not that it's too late in the process, but I know that a lot of them wish it would have happened earlier. I mean, for the corporate events, how early on are the corporations contacting you? Is it pretty much the second they put the event on the calendar that they're contacting you for your work, or is it midway through they've booked the venue and now they just need somebody to put it all together?
You're not going to like this answer.
Oh boy.
It depends.
Okay, that's fair.
Sometimes we get the call, hey, we want to have an event. It's going to be sometime around this time. We need you to help us. And then we're going out to venues and looking at possible dates with the venue. The date isn't even the determining factor. The determining factor is, when can we get a venue that holds what we need? Then we look at those dates and then pick the date. Or sometimes the date is the determining factor, and we're trying to back into, okay, who's available on these dates? And so this can be, ideally it's at least a year in advance. Sometimes it's two or 3 years in advance that we get involved at some level. Now, sometimes we come in later in the game and some things are already in order, and one of my very first questions is, send me all the contracts that have been signed or are currently in consideration. And that's sort of how I would get up to speed. And so I would imagine that you don't save money on a planner by waiting to engage them later. Their fee is generally what their fee is. So save yourself the trouble. Instead of waiting halfway in to bring them in early, because you're not going to spend more money. Same is true of real estate agents. Their fee's the same percentage. You're not going to spend more by calling them halfway through. Just go ahead and get them involved from the beginning.
Absolutely. And I know that with wedding planners specifically, they do have essentially 3 different types of packages that they'll give out. They'll have the full event, so you're getting them right from the beginning. They're planning everything. They'll have partial weddings, so for the brides that have started the planning process and then they might feel overwhelmed, or they might just need somebody to help coordinate everything. So they'll bring them in at that point. And then technically it's called the day of planner, but really it's like month of. And they're really there to just coordinate the day of the wedding, but they do need to be pulled in a month before. But I look at, especially when you're looking for the partial versus the full wedding, it's like the cost structure between the two and how much money they can save you on booking the rest of your vendors just by educating you on the process and what to expect. To your point, it's like, just get them involved early on, because I think that what you would save between a full and a partial would be minimally compared to what they could save you for the rest of the gig.
And that's my point, that even if their fee is lower,
right,
you miss out on some of the benefits that they can provide.
Absolutely.
As well as you have spent a lot of time, and your time is valuable. Your time is the one thing you can't get back. And so there are times where, I know in the corporate world, whenever things have gone a little off the rails, if you will, I can make a phone call to one of my trusted vendors and say, I need some help here. And, this is coming in over budget. I need you to lower the cost here. I need you to help work with me on this, and I'll work with you over here. And that comes from the relationship that I have with them. If it's the first time I'm working with them, I don't have that relationship. If I've worked with them many, many times over, sometimes the conversation is, I have this much budget, can you help me? And oftentimes the answer is yes. Whereas if the question was, what is the price of? The answer is different, right?
Absolutely.
And so that's where the planner can really, really help you out.
Right. And, I think that's a really great point too, to think about their negotiation capabilities versus just a couple, right? I mean, if you're a planner, and I know you're not specifically a wedding planner, but any wedding planner will have that relationship so that they can perhaps negotiate on price or something like that for you. Maybe not, I don't know. But, I know that there's a common disconnect. I mean, I'll talk to brides and they'll think that they can book a photographer in Raleigh for their wedding for $500 when the average is $2,500 to $3,000. So then they start to feel taken advantage of, but that's the price. But I know it's a different conversation on the corporate side. So do you think a planner is something that can help with that, or is it pretty much, if it's a wedding, that's going to be your average?
Well, I think what the planner can help you with is matching you with the right vendor that can maximize the dollars you have to spend.
Right.
And can help you think through decisions like, if you're willing to compromise a bit on your venue or your caterer, you might have more money for your photographer, and help you work through that master plan. And I think that's where the brilliance of an event planner comes in. We often, when we're doing large conferences, we have multiple spaces that we have to set up for the event. And one of the things that we do is we think about, well, how can we maximize the use that the client gets out of the spaces that they're outfitting, as opposed to having more spaces than they really need. And so we have these tricks to optimize things. And I think your planner can help you think through not just the direct implications of your decisions, but the indirect implications as well. And that's where they can start to, really help you. I almost envision it as, someone who is, we'll use a good wedding analogy, is playing the organ. They've got all these levers and things they can pull. Well, your planner has a lot of levers they can pull, and they can say, you know what, if you're willing to go with a less expensive entree, you can have much better photos. And like, if you've already committed to that, and you've already committed to certain food and beverage minimums, then you might not be able to take advantage of that tool or that trick that they have in their tool bag. And so that's just all the more reason to get them involved earlier.
Yeah, absolutely. So just to pivot here, just because it's kind of a curiosity point for me. So tell me a little bit about the digital afterlife.
That's a hard pivot. We went way in the other direction.
I know, but I've been thinking about it. I was like, I wonder how to learn more about this because I truly am interested in this, and we can go back to weddings eventually, but I don't want to run out of time and want to learn more.
We've made it to funerals essentially. We're going to the other life event.
Well, so just to give you some background on Bride Genie, which is the company that I am running we are in the wedding space, but we have a patent on all of our technology. So I mentioned briefly that we looked at just because of similarities between a wedding and a corporate event, pivoting to the corporate world eventually, but also funerals. I mean, it's funny, my family are all entrepreneurs, and the first time I pitched Bride Genie to my dad, who I love to bounce business ideas off of, he looks at me and he goes, "Oh, you should do that for funerals." And I was like, "All right, Dad, let's focus on weddings right now first." But the same model, because I mean, planning a funeral is, even in my opinion, worse than a wedding because you have so much less time. There's even more negative negative emotion that's involved with it because you're mourning the loss of a loved one. And typically the process is you're going and talking to this guy that runs a funeral home and just doing what he says or going off of referrals from, if you had a recent relative pass away. But the process is expensive and people don't know what to do and they don't want to think about it because they're in the worst situation.
You're not in a position to think about it.
No.
And that's actually what brings the notion of what happens to your digital life when you pass.
Yeah.
And that's the idea of the digital afterlife. That's what brings it into such importance because there are, our entire lives are lived in the digital world. Our photos are digital. Our messages are emails and text messages. Everything we do has taken on digital form. Our photos used to be a shoebox in the closet. Now they're on Facebook or Flickr or on our hard drive or who knows where, right? And so it's important to realize that if we want to be able to have some say in how we're remembered digitally, we need to actually take some actions in advance. Maybe we need to make sure that things like Google's inactive account manager is turned on. Google totally has a service to figure out what happens to your email and its contents after you're gone. Facebook has a feature called Legacy Contacts that allows you to specify who can manage your page for you after you're gone. Because you might think, oh, well, Facebook, that doesn't matter to me. But what's interesting is Facebook actually has become a place, actually the profiles of deceased people have become a place for communal bereavement and where you go and post messages and like connect with other folks who are grieving their loss.
Interesting.
And so there's so many facets of this that it's important for us to realize that just in the same way that we want to think about a will, we need to think about what happens to our digital things too. And I often say that if we choose to not take action, it's entirely possible that the things that we would prefer be forgotten are the things that are going to kind of come to the surface. Potentially some embarrassing things maybe, and the things that we really want to be remembered might be lost.
Right.
And so I encourage folks to take an active role in figuring out what will happen to their digital life, and that is whether they incorporate their digital properties in their will, which is totally something you can do now, whether you want to make sure that you have a secure way to make sure your family knows the passwords that they're going to need, or if you're the person in the family who pays the mortgage, does your spouse have that password? I've read a very interesting story about a man who passed away from the coronavirus, and on his phone after he passed, his wife found a letter that he wrote to her with all of the things that she needed to know.
Wow. A
letter that he wrote to her, on a more sentimental value. And note that he wrote to his children because they couldn't see him. And this is a very sad and present example. But he had the forethought to say, I may not survive this, and I need to make sure I've taken care of my family. And so whether it's about the memories or just the operations of the family, there's so much that you need to kind of think about and be prepared for. And so, taking this somber moment and kind of bringing it back around to things more cheery, I think ultimate thing that if you're thinking about a life event, whether it's a wedding or a death, or you're thinking about throwing a special event, advanced planning is the number one thing that you can do. The further you get ahead of this, the better your experience is going to be.
Yeah, I definitely don't think that anybody thinks about like their digital legacy enough. And I think that it is so important, especially, we're talking about this huge life event that people are going through, and even these corporate events, right? Like I can think of the last 2 sales kickoffs that I went to, and they were these giant corporate events, and I had so much fun. The people that I work with were very close friends of mine, and just going to not only the educational events, but then all the fun happy hour things were just a great time. So things like that, or if it's a wedding, or if it's a family, anything. I don't think I think they think that because it's online, it's preserved, but not necessarily, because there's so much that goes into it. And I love that story about, as sad as it is that they lost a loved one, that he was at least intelligent and thinking forward more than most people are, to go ahead and write something like that for his family, because imagine if they didn't have that from him.
Right.
Like, I love that people are starting to think that way, because I think it really is important. And I don't think we have the solution yet to actually preserve that legacy, but I think that it's definitely coming, and people should think about it more, because it's important. And
that's a completely different episode to get into all the things that are there. But I think there's an interesting thing that I like to say about events, is that going in the door, I can only humanly be prepared for about 80% of what might happen. And those are all the things that I can mentally conceive that might happen. And so I need to be 100% prepared for those 80% of things that might happen, so that in the event that something unexpected happens, I have the availability and the time to deal with that 20% that's unexpected. And so my belief is that the more what ifs you can ask, what if this happens, or what if that happens. I went to a wedding once where the caterer was late. You know why the caterer was late? Because the food fell out of their van on the way to the venue.
Oh, no.
Talk about a bad day for the caterer, right? But I can guarantee you that no one at that wedding asked the question, what happens if the food is late?
Or if it doesn't come at all. Were they even able to salvage any of it if it fell off the truck?
Food was consumed. I don't know where it all came from. Right. So
yeah, Uber Eats, DoorDash.
Yes, and the caterer delivered something. But it definitely kind of put a damper on the entire experience, because things no longer flowed. And so I could only imagine if things were ill prepared, right? If you were still trying to run around to make everything else happen, and then that happened, now you're just completely overwhelmed.
Yep.
But if everything else is lined up cool as a cucumber, and that happens, you're like, okay, well, that sucks, but let's kick into action and get some things going.
Absolutely. And I think that's the whole kind of point, right, that we're trying to drive home here is, hey, you can't plan for everything, so you can't do it alone. So do the best you can and get some help, so that you're not just completely overwhelmed at the end.
I've had events that had snow. I've had events that had tornado warnings. And,
oh no,
I've had events that have had power outages. And you prepare for all the things you can conceive, and you sort of put together a bit of a playbook in advance. So if this happens, what will we do? And if this happens, what will we do? And I was dealing with one event where there was a tornado warning. We were in a hotel, an alarm goes off in the hotel, and I call my contact. I said, what does that sound mean?
Oh boy. And
my contact says, I have never heard that sound from this system in my 10 years at this hotel. And so I had my client beside me. She said, Evan, what are we doing? I looked at her and I said, tell your people to shelter in place. Because I had already thought through in advance, okay, if this is, what would we do in the event of a weather situation? And I knew exactly what I wanted to tell them to do. And my first decision was, let me see what the hotel's policy is. It's their building. They're ultimately responsible. We start there. They didn't know. Okay, now it's my decision. This is what we're doing.
Oh my God.
And you just have to be prepared for those things. And if you're planning your own wedding and something like that happens, you're no longer enjoying the wedding because you have to make that decision.
Yeah.
And that kind of stinks.
Yeah, that's definitely not what anybody wants to be thinking about on the day of their wedding or ever. I mean, I know we get sometimes in the Carolinas some tornado warnings, but they've never been where I've heard sirens going off and me having to be like, oh my God, we're all hiding in the closet. Like, let me grab my cat and run.
Right.
I can't even imagine if I had a room full of all of my loved ones and I had to be the one to make that call. I don't even know what I would do. I think I'd just freeze. I don't even know.
Or worse yet, imagine who in your family would take charge and would you appreciate how they handled it? And if the answer is no, it's time for a wedding planner.
Yeah, I think I'm like my dad, and then I'm like, oh, he wouldn't handle it well. No offense, Dad, love you, but I think he would have the model of every man for himself. Right. We would all just be in utter chaos. So I will get a wedding planner for when I get married because I think that's the moral of this story.
And you probably won't need an emergency preparedness plan for your wedding the way we need it at a corporate event. But my point is you don't know what's going to happen.
Right, that's fair. So, I mean, just on the point, because I know that this is something that so many people are dealing with, and I don't want to talk too much because it's almost been talked about to excess, but with COVID, right, your events, how are you guys handling rebooking? I mean, clearly there's nothing of a mass gathering happening in the near future. So, and I know a lot of my vendors are struggling right now. So how are you seeing it on the corporate side?
So we're seeing a lot of movement to virtual events, and those have their own unique set of challenges. And things like how reliable are the internet connections, right? And I have a friend of mine who's a fellow speaker, and she told me, it's like, I was all set up ready for this virtual event, and then my internet line got cut, and I didn't have internet for 3 hours. It's a whole new world of things we have to be prepared for.
Yeah.
Right? And so we're seeing that move to virtual, and we're seeing some really good virtual events, and we're seeing some really bad virtual events. I think the general sentiment in the corporate events world is that a corporation does not want to be, or any business does not want to be held responsible for creating a super spreading event. And so I'm seeing clients as far out as February 2021 say, you know what, we're not going to move forward, or we're going to pursue virtual. We're going to wait and see, because they don't want to. They don't want the negative publicity that comes from a super spreading event, nor do they want the liability that comes from it.
Understandably so, too. I mean, they would be looked at as irresponsible if they did hold that event and something did happen, right? So that's, wow, February, that's wild.
And so one sort of pressure that I think brides and grooms might be feeling right now is, let's say they have an August wedding or a September wedding. What's going to happen? And there's so much stress related to that. The advice I would give them in that particular situation is pick your go or no-go date. And pick that based up in consultation with your venue as well as your primary vendors. What's the last date that we can reasonably say, we need to change, we need to move this, we can't proceed as planned? And set that as your go, no-go date. And then the decision you're worried about right now is making a decision about when you're going to make the decision, which kind of relieves you of the pressure of thinking about every day, is it going to happen? Nope. We're on July 31, that's when we're going to make the decision. And then you can sort of, absolve yourself of all the stress leading up to that.
Right.
So a little piece of advice there. And that's the same advice that we're following in the corporate world. I think that, corporations are being much more cautious. And because it is possible to have a small wedding and it still be wonderful.
Absolutely. I mean, I love small weddings. I think there's something definitely to be said and loved about them. What would be the recommended time then for that no or go date? Go or no date?
I think it would really depend upon your vendors and your contracts. And I'm
That's
not
fair.
familiar enough with
Yeah.
cancellation clauses in wedding venue contracts or wedding catering contracts to make a recommendation. In the corporate events world, we sort of have very specific time frames. If we cancel after a certain time, we lose a certain percentage of the money that we would have spent on the event to the venue or the hotel or wherever it is. So, but that's all very different. So I wouldn't want to speculate.
Right. Fair.
That's why you talk to your planner. Your planner knows what's up.
Yeah. Planner will go to your wedding planners, everybody. They'll tell you the go or no go date.
Exactly.
Absolutely. I think that's really great, though. A good way to think about it, because it is so stressful, and it's not any, but it's something completely unexpected. I mean, when I first heard about COVID, I figured it would be, like swine flu or Ebola, and be like, okay, this is really impacting another part of the world. There's no way it's going to get here. And then it started to spread. And then it's like, okay, well, it's starting to move into Europe. It's starting, and like now the potential of it coming here is real. And then it started coming into the United States, and it's like, oh wow, my going out is coming to the studio. Like, this is the big day.
Right.
So I just, something, it's not as unexpected as a tornado, which has zero warning, but it's not something that anybody expected. And with no clear end date in sight, I think that's the real scare for some of the brides, even that are later this year. They're like, they don't know. And I'm in so many Facebook groups that are for brides that have COVID weddings, they're saying. And even if they're in November or December, they're like, I don't know if I should keep my wedding date. And that's crazy to think about. I mean, I feel for them. Like, I can't imagine having that. It's, so stressful as it is, and it's supposed to be this wonderful once in a lifetime experience, and now you're worried about if it's going to happen or not. So,
and that's where the professionals can help you.
Yep.
And they can help guide you. And the more you trust them,
yes,
I think the better things really and truly will be.
Absolutely. Gotcha. Yeah, well, I think that, there's a lot to be said about the differences and the similarities between, corporate events and weddings. I think that there's a lot in line. There's obviously the budget differences, the emotional differences, but just the advice of having somebody there in your corner who's on your side fighting for you and making sure that you are guided in the right direction, I think is probably the best advice that either of us could give a bride or a groom in moving forward with their events, and this time and future times, and hopefully COVID is not around anymore, and we can go out and be normal again. But is there any other, if you had to give, other than having a planner, one...
Have we beaten that horse to death?
I think so. I think everybody's like, okay, so should I get a wedding planner, or, maybe not that important.
Let me be clear. Get a wedding planner.
Well, I know all of my wedding planners that are listening to this will love you being on here and really honing in on the importance, because especially with the digital age, and and this is something we get all the time from planners when we first tell them about Bride Genie, is they wonder if we're competition for them, and we're not. We are not a wedding planning app. We're helping with the matching and the booking process of vendors and couples. But wedding planners is a category, and we definitely encourage our couples to get a wedding planner. But I mean, is there anything else that you're seeing from either the corporate side for your corporate customers or for brides, or both, that you just think is crucial for now or moving forward, like a piece of advice that you can think of?
That's interesting. I think part of it for me coming onto your show was first to help address this difference of reality versus expectations when it comes to budgets, and also to really advocate for the role of a professional, because something that I really must say is that even as an event professional, I couldn't plan a wedding because I don't know the process. I don't know the people. I don't have the relationships. And so just today, I had someone ask me about doing a particular type of lighting for their wedding. And I actually referred them to a rental house, and I said, these are the people you should talk to because I know they have what you need. We don't have that. We couldn't do that for you as much as I would want to. And so I would say that wedding vendors have all learned to stay in their lane and do the thing that they're good at. Wedding planners know who's good at what they do. And so, and as someone who's planning a wedding or a bride and a groom, stay in your lane. Understand what you're good at. And this takes a huge amount of self-awareness. And so I think in addition to having the team on your side, I think there's a mental state you want to approach your big event with. And that is one of respect for your vendors. It is one of respect for yourself and your own time, and respect for the people that sort of help translate between your vision and the actual execution of that, and realize that these folks are all here to help you. One of the things that is another axe that I like to grind is as a public speaker. Oftentimes I'll hear speakers tell me that the audiovisual team is always out to screw them. Like, they always screw things up, and because they've had a bad experience here or there. And I really want to jump up and down and say, no one wants you to give a bad performance.
Right.
No one wants that to happen. It's what needs to happen is a conversation and more understanding.
Absolutely.
And so I guess the piece of advice I would give is, if you're uncomfortable with something and you don't understand it, ask the question. Say, tell me more about this. If you don't agree with pricing, the question shouldn't be, oh, that's way too much. I can get it for $300 down the road. I think the question is, help me understand why the price is what it is. Help me understand what goes into that. Because chances are there's usually good reason behind everything that you're being presented. So I would approach with a sense of respect and curiosity instead of the bridezilla angst that we always hear about.
Absolutely. I think that's a really great piece of advice, and that communication is key. Just asking those simple questions can really help overcome some of the hurdles that they're facing. So, well, Evan, thank you so much for coming on today. We really appreciate it. And the name of your production company?
So Attended Events is my production company, and you can find us at attendedevents.com. Myself as a speaker over at evancarroll.net, and Evan Carroll on most social media, and unless it looks like I'm from Texas, in which case that is certainly not me. Okay. Well, we'll make sure, North Carolina barbecue is better than Texas barbecue too. Yes. We'll plug that in there too. So, so the Texas Evan Carroll, not me. Yeah. Not me. I can't claim anything that he says. Great. Well, thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it. Thank you. All right. Thanks, Scott.